So one thing I've been really excited about, we've kind of talked about it in the last couple of podcasts, or at least it's been a topic that's brought up, is going to be electric motorcycles, specifically the Stark Varg. Now, a friend of mine, Josh Mouzakis, recently went to Spain, got to test it out, not pre-production, but before it was released to the public. And so he's here today to talk to us a little bit about his background, but also his experience in Spain and his overall opinion and kind of shakedown of what he experienced riding the Stark Varg. Because I know a lot of us are curious about it. Me personally, I still ride a two-stroke, so it's kind of tells you where I stand on riding the old novelty bikes or sticking with gas power. But on the other end, I have ridden electric bikes before in the past, and the big thing that impresses me all the time about them is going to be the outright power and the torque and delivery of it. And to me, I don't care how you slice it, power's power. And when you accelerate and you feel that moves your soul. You know, it's super exhilarating, and I think the strongest form of acceleration I've ever experienced was on an electric bike. So here today to talk is Josh Mouzakis. So how you doing, man?
Pretty good. Good to be here.
So how was it? When was this that you, we'll just jump right into it. When was it that you went to Spain?
This was earlier May this year.
And how did that even come about?
So essentially I just got really lucky. They were bringing over some of the first people to order that had pre-ordered their bikes. For those who don't know, Stark basically did a pre-order system for these bikes. You would put down a $100 deposit, and you would essentially like save your place in line for the bikes when they came into production. And now people are starting to get those bikes that they ordered. But initially, before any bikes were actually left the factory, they invited a few of the first pre-ordered customers to actually go over to Spain, ride the bike, tour the facility, and things like that. So that's actually not how I was able to get in, though. I wasn't like an early pre-order or anything. I was still the first day, but some guys were just immediately happy on the trigger, I guess. So a friend of mine, Austin, that's the owner of Electro and Co., he was in contact with Anton, the CEO and founder of Stark, before he knew anything of what the company was. And Austin had been involved with Alta before, not as an employee or anything, but he was kind of one of the first adopters of electric bikes. He had one of the first Altas and was like really going far down that road. So he had a lot of contact with the company. He knew a lot of the suppliers that Alta was using and some of the resources they were using, things like that, but he was not actually an employee. So when Alta went under, he was privy to a lot of that information, but he wasn't under an NDA or anything like that. So he was able to kind of freely talk about it, whereas ex-employees were not. So he was in contact with Anton, not knowing what Anton was working on, and he helped him kind of source components through some of the suppliers that Alta was using prior to them going out of business a few years ago. And just kind of as a thank you for that, Anton invited him to come over, and I was lucky enough to tag along, basically, and share that experience with him, just kind of as a thank you to me for some of the prior work I had done for him. So
what's the relationship between you and Austin?
So Austin, being the owner of Electro and Co., I do some work on the side for them. I do some engineering work. I race their electric pit bikes at events. So I've kind of been involved with that company from the beginning. I did a lot of work for free, basically, to start with, just because they couldn't pay me to begin with. I mean, they were a startup of all startups with no cash, everyone just doing work on the side. And just kind of as a thank you for that and believing in them early on, this was kind of a way he was able to thank me and let me tag along for this trip.
And what does Electro and Co. specialize in?
So Electro and Co. does electric conversion kits for motorcycles. So right now they're mainly focused on the pit bike side of things. They do have some of their own bikes, like the ETM lineup, that are great for kids or newer riders. They also offer the EMX 14, EMX 17 kits. The 14 converts a KTM 65 into a full electric pit bike, and that's the one that I actually race when we go to events and things like that. And it's wild. I mean, we let people ride it, and it seems like about 50-50 for people looping it out when they get on it, just because they think electric and they're like, oh, like, yeah, it's not going to be that fast. They're thinking of like kind of kids' toys, and then they get on and wick the throttle and it just puts them right on their back. And
oh, no, I've been a victim of that. To me, you get on something and it's so small and you just kind of anticipate it to not have a whole lot of torque, or at least even if it does, you think it's going to wind up to get there. I think the biggest surprise to me is when you get on an electric bike that all that torque is instantaneous from a standstill zero, like what you would feel on a 2-stroke or even a 4-stroke when it's at peak power. That delivery that you hit, that hit that you have at peak power, that same amount of hit is there from the get-go.
Yeah, that's true. It's actually interesting because the initial hit, like think like a gate drop or something, there is a lag. So we can get into that a little bit more later, but you're actually down on power initially, like right at an initial gate drop, and a lot of that being you don't have a clutch to kind of pop and get that initial jump start. But once you get to a tiny bit of RPM, that's when the power picks up immediately. So sometimes you'll kind of get pulled like a bike length or so right at the beginning, and then you just make it up immediately. But that's kind of a dichotomy we can talk about later. But yeah, basically going back to Electro and Co., they do conversion kits for bikes. We're working on other stuff, hopefully to get in the full-size bike game at some point. And they also offer a lot of hop-up kits for even those little Razor, like, toy electric bikes that you see in Walmart. They have kits to make those things just insane. Like, I'm talking geared right, they can go highway speeds. It's crazy. It's just wild, and they're a ton of fun to ride. I'm actually building one up for myself personally right now, and I can't wait to get that thing going.
Those things are insane. So then not to go into detail with what kind of services you provide, but you have a great engineering background, and I know we've worked a lot together, and really brilliant guy. But you've made a lot of parts, so is it going to be more like on the 3D printing side, or is it just the manufacturing side, or what kind of stuff do you kind of work on?
So right now, I do a lot of 3D printing stuff. So I have my own company called 3DP Moto, and that's initially how I had met Austin. He had asked me to do some parts for them for these bikes, and the battery boxes on these e-conversions, I'm actually 3D printing right now. So that's kind of how that whole relationship started. But I do design work for all sorts of parts for them. They could be machined aluminum parts. They could be 3D printed parts. It could be anything really, just kind of whatever they need. I offer those services to them, basically.
So then fast forward, you guys get the invite to go to Spain. What was that like?
That was wild. Kind of hearing that news was crazy, because prior to that, I had never traveled internationally. I'd never been out of the country. Luckily, I already had my passport that I got in like early 2020, so great timing there. But yeah, I was just excited. I didn't really know what to expect. There was a lot of, even at that time, rumors about the company. They were already kind of behind on bike deliveries and stuff like that, so I was just curious to see what was going on over there, how big of an operation it really was, and obviously ride the bike. I mean, I had ridden in Alta a little bit prior to that, but not a whole lot. And this was supposedly going to be another leap forward, so I was really, really curious to see what they had achieved over there.
Was this before or after you had raced that Endurocross on that electric bike, that YZ conversion that you ran?
This was after, so that was almost a year ago now. That was back in November of 2022.
Damn, it's been that long.
Yeah, and that bike was cool. I'll actually be on it again this year, but it was a 96 or 97, I believe, that we got just as a rolling chassis, and basically using a kit, all of the parts other than the motor brackets and things like that I had to custom make, but the electric motor, the controller, the throttle, everything you can get on electroandcompany.com. So we basically wanted to prove that you could take that kit and make a competitive bike. So I just kind of went through, mounted everything up. We had a custom battery made and went and raced Endurocross on it, and that was a lot of fun.
That was the Reno round? Is that
yeah.
Yeah. I remember seeing video of that. I was like, holy cow. I remember seeing it all come together, too. I was like, what are you doing? And then looking back on it, the whole getting it together, as far as like the design work might have taken a little bit of time, but the assembly and the whole thing was pretty simple altogether. You know, when you really look at it, there wasn't a whole lot to it. It was just slapping that thing in, making sure it fits, and running it almost.
Totally. Once all the design work is done, like it's almost a whole lot of nothing and then everything all at once. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you picture like a typical like gas internal combustion engine. You've got hundreds of parts, especially a 4-stroke. You know, you got your cranks, your pistons, you got your cams, valves, all that stuff. Transmission has a whole bunch of parts. Then you look at a whole electric system, and you literally have a motor, a controller, a battery. That's basically it. I mean, you can have that thing disassembled in 10 minutes.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It's exponentially simpler.
Less maintenance.
Way less. Yeah. I mean, you're still going to have your chassis maintenance, obviously, but
Yeah.
you're not changing oil. There's no pistons to replace. Your valves are never going to leak, you know?
Yeah.
They're not going to get tight.
I have questions about maintenance down the line, but we'll skip all that for right now because I want to get to what it's like. So you get to Spain. It's exciting. It's your first time traveling abroad. What was the process like? How did you guys get a ride, or how did you get over to the factory, and how did everything go from there?
So basically, we flew into Barcelona, and when we got there, they had a driver ready to pick us up. They said they would. We were like, the email communication at the time was a little bit spotty, especially with the time difference, because we're basically almost 12 hours opposite here.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so communication can be kind of hard. So we just showed up at the airport and we're like, well, hopefully the driver's here. And yeah, we walked out, got our bags and everything, and sure enough, there's a driver there holding the sign with our names. And yeah, we just hopped in the van. At that time, they actually just took us straight to a hotel. It was like, I want to say it was like 5 or 6 p.m. there. And we had been traveling for 18 hours or something like that. So we're completely just backwards on time, jet lag, trying to figure out what was going on, you know?
Yeah.
So we ended up just getting there, taking a nap immediately. And then I was so disoriented. I took a 3-hour nap and woke up and I thought it was the next morning. It was bad. I woke up all fired up to go ride the bike. And then I realized it was 9 p.m. and not 9 a.m. or something. It was bad.
That's like we're going to Disneyland. It's like, bud, you got another 12 hours before you get
Exactly. Yeah.
So you guys end up getting to the factory next morning, or?
Yeah, next morning. So they had everybody who was on that tour. There was, I think, 10 of us or something like that, was staying at the hotel. So we ended up meeting a few guys. And yeah, the next morning they picked all of us up. The factory was actually only, 5-10 minutes from that hotel. It was really close. And it was cool because it was a giant warehouse. You picture, almost roll up to a Target or something, or a Walmart, but there's a big Stark sign on it.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was wild. It was kind of surreal. Me being somebody that's, really a nobody as far as racing is concerned. I've never been to the Yamaha factory or the Honda factory, and I was I imagine that's what it's like. You pull up to this warehouse building and it's oh, Stark or Honda or Yamaha, it was a really, really cool experience.
That's rad. So then when you go in, is there an NDA or anything that you had to do for whatever you were going to see, or were they limited on what they showed you, or how did all that go?
The big thing was not bringing phones in. Okay. So we could bring our phones in, but once we got to the office space, they basically just took us upstairs to their office space loft area into their conference room. We had to leave our phones in there, which not too hard to understand. There's a whole lot of proprietary technology going on, even just their build process of things they don't want getting out there, so that was really it, though. We signed a waiver for riding the bike, but I don't think that wasn't a binding NDA or anything as far as I'm aware.
Gotcha. So then, did you see bikes getting built, or did you see them they just show you bring you into a shop and you have a bunch of ready to ride bikes, or what was all that?
No, we saw everything. As far as I'm aware, there wasn't anything that we didn't see. Basically, when we went downstairs, we got in the whole warehouse. We saw, at that time, they had one assembly line going. We saw them kind of slowly building bikes on that assembly line. And granted, keep in mind, this was early this year, so that was I'm sure production's like kind of ramped up since then, but this was like early days of their building the first bike. So they're still, at that time, they were still kind of getting the kinks worked out in their assembly line and things like that. But what it looked like to me was, it looked like something they could easily scale. I say easily, not that it's easy to scale an assembly line, but basically like once they got the process down with the one assembly line, they could very easily just stack assembly lines next to it. So I would assume, I'm not privy to any information that other people aren't, but I would assume that's probably what they're doing at this time, is kind of stacking assembly lines and slowly kind of building up production in that way.
So how to get from, I mean, before we get to the writing, I know you and I always talk about it, that they had kind of an idea of what they're trying to achieve, you know, because I was mentioning like, oh, who knows, maybe it'll be a really good electric bike, and you corrected me real quick on that with what kind of the stance they're taking. So what was that?
So their stance is similar to Alta. They're not trying to build the best electric bike. They're just trying to build the best bike, period. That's their goal. They don't care if it's gas. They don't care if it's electric. They want this to be the bike that you choose because this is what you go the fastest on. That's it.
And how was it when you finally got to ride it?
I would say they achieved that goal. Definitely.
I always thought that when you get on an electric bike, it's going to be like getting on a spaceship. It's something completely alien. And the times that I've been on one, good ones at least, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like a really good motorcycle. So how did it feel for you finally getting to throw a leg on the Varg?
So, yeah, that was basically my experience. I like to use the word intuitive. Basically, it's kind of easy for you to understand and get familiar with when you get on it. So people who have ridden like cheaper electric bikes or like kind of kids' toys or something, they get a bad sense of electric because the controllers on those bikes are just not very good. They're a price point, you know. You're not going to get a bike with a good controller for $300.
What's the controller do?
So the controller basically interprets what you're doing with the throttle and translates that to control the motor. So, and it's not as simple as if you're giving 50% throttle, it's going to give you 50% power. There's a lot more to it. I'm not a firmware engineer. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm not going to pretend that I know all the ins and outs of that. But there's all sorts of considerations of like load on the motor, what your throttle input is, what speed you're going. There's all sorts of stuff, and that to me is really what makes or breaks a bike. If you have a controller that's intuitive and consistent, intuitive being like you understand how it works, or you
can anticipate how it's going to work.
Exactly. But it also needs to be consistent, because if it does different things under different loads or something that you're not expecting, that's a whole nother problem. And as far as I could tell, the Stark controller was great. I mean, I was able to hop on and just go immediately.
How would you translate that? So if you were to ride a bike that has a crappy controller on it, like even those like you were talking about, the cheaper, really simple electric bikes, like what sensation am I going to get in the throttle hand or just riding the bike versus something that's actually working right?
The biggest one I've noticed is a pause. So when you give it throttle, there might be a millisecond pause or something. It might not even be that long, but you can feel it. Like we're used to, I mean, most of us grew up with gas bikes, so we know the second you give it throttle, there's a cable. It's going to open that carburetor, open that throttle body, and you're going to go, right? There's no lag on that, or at least not really perceptible to an average rider. Electric, on the cheaper controllers, there can be a lag sometimes, and that will, as you can imagine, totally throw you off. Like that's not intuitive to anybody.
Is it enough to kind of throw your balance off too?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if you were really riding it, and like if you picture like trying to manual or like wheelie through some rollers or something, if you had a pause in your throttle, would you be able to do that? I couldn't.
I can't do that with a good throttle.
It's already hard enough for me. I don't need like another barrier to entry there.
You're talking to the wrong guy, buddy. I sometimes I get input lag when I'm playing MX versus ATV or something. But so you get on the so riding the Varg, the controller feels pretty good. What about handling and just what do they do? Like, so are you at a test track? Like, where are you even riding it?
Yeah, so basically where we went was a place called Golf MX, and it was supposedly an old golf course that got converted over to a motocross track. So it had quite a bit of elevation change, which was nice. Their prep over there is a little bit different than what we have here. So theirs was almost like a really deep rip, but it wasn't watered a lot. So you kind of had like large, like dirt clod, like chunks almost. And we had gotten some rain the night before, so it was actually better than it normally is apparently. But there was like some really hard packed sections in the straightaways, and then you come into corners and like the insides could be crazy deep, but also hard. Like it wasn't like watered deeply like our tracks get. So when I initially went out with the bike, like just getting on the bike the first time, going out to ride, that was kind of something I had to get used to. So, and I knew that going in. So first thing I tried to do was just go out and do a long moto, like do 25 minutes or so, or I didn't have like a watch or anything, so I kind of was guesstimating. But I did a solid 20-25 minutes because I wanted to see what the battery was going to be. That was like my main concern. So I went out there, did that, kind of used that to get used to the track and used to the bike, and kind of let the track break in, because there was only, I think, 8 of us riding, so it wasn't like we had a bunch of 450s out there just like pounding a track in, you know, on like a regular practice day. So we kind of had to work in our own lines, and we're all of like varying skill levels, so those lines weren't consistent between everybody, you know, at the beginning.
And for anybody listening that's wondering Josh's skill level, he's on the verge of maybe A. He rips for sure, and then races a little bit of pro stuff on hill climb and all that. Anything that's technical is usually kind of, you see him excel. But
yeah, I'm like it's always hard to know by classes because that can vary so much by like region.
Yeah, one track you're hauling win an A class, and then another track it's like,
yeah, exactly. So I don't know. We'll say I can get around at a decent pace. I'm not pro level, but I'm not putting around either.
Yeah, he hauls. He hauls. That's all you got to know.
All right, fine. We'll go with that. Yeah, so initially, like I wanted to focus on battery life and see, because that was kind of the question everybody had, including me. So the Stark has a 6.5 kilowatt hour battery, whereas the Alta had, I think, like 5 or 5.5, and the range really wasn't that great on the Alta. It was okay, but me being someone that had a pre-order down, I was like, I want to make sure I can get 30 minutes out of this, you know. Yeah. And in that time, that 20-25 minutes or so, I think I used, I want to say 65% of the battery or something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but it was enough to where I was like, oh, okay, I could, at my skill level, I could probably get 40 minutes out of this relatively easily. And another thing to note, and what they told me, was the percentage that you see on the bike is not linear. So I don't know the specifics of why, but I've had multiple people tell me this, where measuring battery life in a percentage like that is not something that's easy to do through software. So when you're at like 35% or so, you actually probably have about half battery left.
Is it going to be the battery's ability to get that power delivered? So like, is there a fall off to that as it gets lower, or?
I think the only time the Stark tapers power, I believe, is after 10%, I want to say.
Okay.
Don't take that number as like an absolute. I'm sure they have that info on their website. I'm going off memory, but it's way down there where you're not going to see or feel a drop in power until that point.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my initial impression. Once the track actually broke in and I was able to kind of get comfortable on the bike and stuff, the first thing I noticed was I ended up jumping on a bike with stiffer suspension. The one that I was on initially was just too soft. And when I got on that bike, the rear shock was really stiff and the forks were a little bit soft. It wasn't unrideable or anything. I mean, I wasn't there to critique suspension. I was there to test the bike and have fun, you know. But that was just something I noticed. I kind of played with clickers a little bit and we got it better. With that said, the biggest thing I noticed with that bike was coming into corners. So when you initially came into corners, I felt like the bike was pretty good. It was stable. When you made that transition from kind of braking to, or like braking or coasting to throttle, is where it got a little unstable for me. Like the front end, I wouldn't necessarily say it wanted to like pick up or like wheelie when you're getting on the throttle, but it just kind of had like a vague feel and it felt like I wanted to push a little bit. But if you had a rut to go into, it really wasn't a problem.
Gotcha.
So a lot of the corners on that track, we didn't really have ruts to bank off of. So it was hard to get like a solid grass. It was so different than tracks that we have around here.
What did it feel like jumping it?
Jumping it's awesome. So that's one of the best things about electric bikes is there's no way you can stall it, which is great. So if you, for some reason, got in a bad situation, you need to bring the front end down quickly, no problem. Just jam the brake.
Really?
Doesn't
you
even
stomp on that thing.
Exactly.
Really?
There's no clutch to cover, no anything. Some of the bikes you can order them equipped with the rear brake on the left handlebar, where your clutch would normally be, and that's just a preference thing. Some guys like it, some don't. But yeah, you can just jam that brake as hard as you want, and then if you get in an endo scenario where your front end is too low, that's where the electric bikes really shine. So you can bring that front end up out of almost anything, because when we normally are in like a panic rev scenario on a gas bike that has gears, like let's say you took off in third gear on a jump and you're in a panic rev scenario, unless you somehow shift up, that back wheel is only going to go so fast because you're going to run out of gear. That motor is going to hit rev limit, whatever your gear reduction ratio through the primary and the transmission and your sprockets, that back wheel is only going to spin so fast. On electric, it's not like that. You're going to spin, when you give it gas in the air, like full gas, you're spinning top speed. So that's like fifth gear tacked on the rev limiter on your 450.
Even if it would be like equivalent to like a second gear jump on a 4-stroke.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, you could, let's say it was a steep like 20 or 30 foot double or something that you're going to take off in second gear on your 450, and you get in a panic rev scenario, it's like automatically being in fifth gear and getting that back wheel spinning fast and increasing that inertial weight, and that just brings the back end down immediately. So it's an unbelievably safe bike to jump.
What's that feel like when you're doing that though? Because I remember you coming back and talking about how it kind of blew your mind, like how much you could move. Because how much is it? Do you know off the top of your head how much it weighs?
I want to say it was like, what they claimed initially was a little bit low. I think they claimed like 250 initially, and I want to say when people started getting them on scales, it was like 260 or 270 or so.
Okay.
It was a little less than the Alta, I believe.
But manipulating that in the air, was how much maneuverability does it have?
So in the air, it feels light. So that's the interesting thing. Everything, when you're actually riding a bike, when we're talking about like engineering work or something, we talk about what they call free body diagrams. So that would essentially be your, like, if you're doing Newtonian physics or something, we're talking about like acceleration, rotational acceleration, things like that. All that really matters is where the center of mass of a body is. So if we're talking about a motorcycle, the center of mass is ideally somewhere in the center. Like all the manufacturers, that's why you have all of them with the motor as close to the center as they can. They have the exhaust getting shorter and shorter. All of that is an effort to bring mass toward the center of the bike. If you have the mass centralized on the bike, no matter how heavy it is, it's going to feel lighter than if you could have a light bike on the scale, but if you have weight far away from that center of gravity or center of mass, it's going to feel like a heavy bike. So with electric, not having any of that rotational inertia of the motor and being able to have the battery and the electric motor pretty close to the center of mass of the bike, it feels light. So your 280-pound bike is not going to feel any heavier than your 252 stroke in the air.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild thing.
Wow.
It's hard for people to kind of wrap their head around, but at the same time, if you give it gas in the air, because you can spin that back wheel so quick, you can get yourself out of trouble in a hurry. Like it can snap back straight quickly if you need it to.
Wow.
It's wild.
And what the track that you're riding, what kind of jumps were they? Were they like kind of pitchy, like supercrossy, or were they more traditional motocross? Or
it depended. The motocross track we were on, there was some smaller jumps. There was like one kind of larger tabletop, but nothing big. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 feet, but it was right out of a corner, so it was actually kind of hard to get over. Well, it was easy on the Varg. If I was on like a 250 or something, it would have been like a little bit harder. So there wasn't any like massive jumps or anything, but it was enough for you to be able to feel exactly what it what it would feel like. Like you could easily extrapolate that to a bigger jump, you know. And they actually had a Supercross track there. It was like hard pack and like unprepped, but I wanted to try it.
So did you?
Yeah, it was. I wanted to see what it was like. Like we don't have. I mean, me and you, we both live in Northern California, so we don't have really access to that. Like, there's nowhere to ride Supercross, you know, if you're a regular person. So it was something I kind of wanted to try. So I went over there and took the bike, and I wasn't like jumping triples or anything, but like the rhythm sections, like I was able to double through competently and kind of feel the bike out. Obviously, suspension was way too soft for that, but being able to like time the jumps and like control the pitch and stuff, and like really almost ride like BMX style. Like I do a lot of BMX stuff just for fun, and it was kind of similar to that, where I could like really lean over the bars, like coming into a double in the rhythm section, and feel confident that if I overcooked it a little bit, it doesn't matter. Just give it a little gas and we'll bring the front end right back up.
A little juice.
Exactly.
Little juice.
Yeah, we're gonna have to find like Brop isn't gonna work anymore. We got to come up with something else for that.
Zing. I don't know what that would be. Yeah, it's more like a buzz. When we were talking about the kind of the spring rates and anything you felt in the chassis, it almost seemed more like it was the spring rate, or maybe a little bit of valving stuff, but stuff that's almost not worth bringing up because you could sort right through it pretty quick with some decent adjustment, you know.
Yeah, like I mean, the suspension definitely, I felt like when I was riding it was holding me back, like from being able to push like hard, but I don't want that to be like a detraction from the bike. Like, we're talking an early days suspension setting that they were still working on.
Gotcha.
Like,
Okay.
That's, I don't know that I doubt that's what's on the production bikes. Like,
understood. Yeah.
That was, at the time, was a problem when I was riding it, but I don't think that's in any way indicative of how the bike's going to ride now. Like, I was trying to focus solely on, like, how's the chassis, how's the balance, how's the power come on, that kind of thing. Because suspension, I mean, for the most part, if people are serious, they're tuning their suspension anyway.
Yeah.
So I didn't, that wasn't like a major concern to me or any kind of turn off on the bike.
Gotcha. Do you get arm pump at all?
I do. It depends. Like I like to think that I'm in pretty good shape, but then I'll show up at some tracks, or like if I get nervous or something, and just like pump up immediately, especially if it's like early in the day and muddy or something. And then like the end of the day, I'll be fine. Like it just totally depends.
Do you feel like any of those experiences or those little nuances would be any different on the Varg?
I do, because when you don't have a clutch to worry about, you can focus a lot more on what you're doing technique wise. So not having a shifter on the left side or a clutch, you're free to kind of put your feet where you want them to be. So I have bad habits when I ride because I grew up trail riding. So I'm really bad about riding like on the arches of my feet and stuff, because I'm used to always having to cover my like brake and shifter. On the e-bikes, though, not having the shifter and stuff, like I can actually put my feet where they're supposed to be and like have a little bit better form. And you're also not taking up mental capacity worrying about shifting in the clutch. So you can really think about like, am I grabbing with my legs? Am I breathing? Doing all those things that you're supposed to do when you're riding, because you have kind of that excess mental bandwidth that's not being taken up by just shifting clutch work now. The only other thing is I don't remember getting like arm pump at all that day. Obviously I wasn't pushing like crazy hard. I didn't want to be the guy that like wadded up and got hurt in a foreign country.
Yeah.
But the throttle that they use, it's called a Hirschman throttle. Like it's just an off the shelf throttle. I've never been a fan of that throttle. I think it has like too stiff of a spring pull, and it's not like crazy stiff compared to like a regular motocross bike or anything. I'm just, me personally, I like a super light throttle pull. I don't know why, just a personal preference. So if anything was going to give me arm pump, maybe it would have been that, but it really wasn't a problem for me.
Did you feel anything on it though that you would say you like, you know, your gas bike better, or?
Not really. I mean, it other than like taking suspension or handling kind of out the window, because we're talking about a completely different bike that I hadn't ridden before. Like, it's not fair for me to compare handling or comfort level compared to like my YZ250 that I've had for
1,000 hours.
Yeah, I have like 400 hours on that thing, you know. versus a bike that I just got on 10 minutes ago. Like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I was surprised how comfortable I felt immediately. Like, I wasn't like I got on and just felt like a fish out of water or anything. Like, I mean, I probably did a total of maybe a little over an hour of ride time, hour and a half or so. And by the end, I mean, I was pushing it decently hard and running like a good pace and felt comfortable. Like, I wasn't going 100%, but like I was doing a solid 85, 90%, you know, safe but fast.
That's cool. And now, what did they do for battery? So if you get an hour and a half of ride time, what did they do to have it charged? Did you have to like ride and then sit and wait for it to charge, or do they have different bikes for you to ride, or did they change a battery out? How did that work?
A little bit of both. So we never swap batteries out or anything. I'm not sure. I think you can do it relatively quick, but it's not something that would be like cost effective for a consumer to do. Each of those batteries, if you bought a new one, would probably be like $6 or $7 or something like that. Like, it's not going to be, people aren't going to just have like 3 batteries to go with this bike.
Oh, once they start racing them, they will.
Well, yeah, teams will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'm talking like your regular like weekend warrior or something.
Gotcha.
Not likely they're going to have a spare battery. So we'd ride for a bit and then come back in, throw it on the charger. There were, I think, 8 of us and like 10 bikes or something. So sometimes there was one that was charged. You can go and hop on that one. I kind of tried to stick with one bike through most of the day. There was only, I think, 2 out there that had the stiff suspension setting that I liked. So I tried to like stick with that bike for the most part. So
how long was the charge time?
It would vary. So the one that I rode, it's hard to say because we never went from like fully dead to fully charged. And I don't know what their power source was exactly. So I don't want to give like false numbers on that or anything. I would say if I had to guess, it would probably fully charge within an hour and a half, but I don't want people to like take that as a definite or anything.
I got you. Too many variables. And then plus, is it like, are you topping off? Is it coming off a generator? Is this like legit power, or is it
Totally.
Yeah, I hear you.
Especially if you're running like, if you have one of these bikes, you're going to need a generator that's capable of like 220.
Okay.
Don't even, if you're charging off like 110, it's going to take a long time. You got to have a generator or an outlet that's capable of 220 for sure.
Is that the only con you could really see with having an electric bike is going to be the power source, or not the power, but maintaining power for the day and everything?
I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I mean, everyone likes to joke about the irony of like, oh, you're bringing a gas generator to like power your electric bike. Yeah, sure. Well, that gas generator is going to go through a gallon of gas in a whole day. You know, and they're the efficiency level is like a totally different thing. But I don't really think it's that big of a deal, honestly. And another option people have, and something that I might look into doing once I finally get my Varg and finish another bike that I'm working on, is set up like a battery bank in my van, like 10 kilowatt hours worth of batteries in my van with an inverter, and be able to charge directly off that. So that'll give me, if I went to the track with a fully charged bike and basically a battery and a half of power just in my van ready to go, I wouldn't have to lug a generator around. I can just hook directly up to that, fast charge it, and be done. So, and that's more of an upfront cost, obviously. It's more than a generator, but you're not lugging a generator every day. You're not having to pay for gas. It's a convenience thing. So
yeah, and if
it's
you're
another option.
It's part of your Moto van, part of your setup. So it'd be the same as me having the right tools for all the maintenance, or like when someone's a little hardcore and they got a spare top end and it's spare this and that, like the longevity of like what you're going to invest into your gas bike. You know, you kind of invest that into having a solid power source to keep you motoing, really, is what it would come down to. Do you see any other cons to that bike?
I mean, it depends on what kind of riding you do. Like, if you're a guy that just goes out, like our local tracks around here usually do 20-30 minute sessions or so, and then you're waiting around for another 30 or 40 minutes as they like split by skill level and kids and stuff. If you're riding those days, I don't think you're going to have a problem at all. You're going to be able to charge in between. Everything's going to be fine. If you're a guy that likes to go out and do 3-hour like desert rides or something, probably not going to be the bike for you. And that's okay. I mean, I don't think anybody from Stark would tell you that that's what their bike's going to do. So you kind of just have to look at yourself and say, okay, what kind of riding do I do, and is electric going to work for me? Because I mean, the range for that kind of stuff just isn't there. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line right now.
Is that restricted to technology, you think?
It's hard to say. Like, I'm, again, not a battery expert. As far, all I know is that most bikes now are using like 21700 cells. They're made by like Panasonic, or there's various companies that make them. I know like solid state technology is starting to potentially come online, and supposedly that's going to have like a big jump. But I mean, it comes down to cost, right? Like, how much are those batteries going to cost? How much, like, what's the power density jump going to be? I don't know any of those numbers offhand. That's not my field of expertise, but I can't imagine we're going to see some like 300% jump in battery capacity in the next few years. You know, I don't think that's realistic.
So then that brings us into, you have one on pre-order, right?
Yes.
So when's yours supposed to be getting here?
Supposedly December. I've been in the same boat as everyone else, just kind of watching that delivery date get bumped back, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, like, I know the challenge that they've taken on with building these bikes and stuff, I mean, it's not small, you know? I mean, when we put our pre-orders in 2 years ago, I mean, we were honestly living in a totally different world. You know, there's a war in Europe now. Everyone has dealt with supply chain issues. I mean, look at even like Yamaha and KTM and being able to have like OEM parts availability. You know, they're all dealing with it. And yeah, everyone's dates kind of gotten pushed back, including mine. It sucks, but it is what it is. I mean, the bike's good. I want the bike, so
yeah,
I gotta wait. That's the bottom line.
Did you get the big dog one? Did you get the 80 horsepower or whatever however they're calling it?
Of course.
Yeah.
I talked to you about this. You were not going to let me get the smaller one.
I just had to make sure. I didn't get confirmation. I just was like, what are you thinking? Like, you've ridden it. You need to, like, absolutely you need to get one. But no, I'm excited for you now. With that going into racing now, I mean, obviously, I've been trying to pay attention. I've been wide open too, but trying to pay attention to how these are going to be competed. I think you were probably one of the first to actually use one in competition stateside. I think over at Big Hill Jam, because I can't think of any event that was before that. There might have been one, but I don't recall.
I know Brian Haskell. He was the first to actually get his Varg.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's raced like some local motocross races on it. As far as I know, me running it at Big Hill Jam was the first like AMA pro level race that the Varg's been in. And we're talking hill climb at this point, so this isn't like Supercross or Motocross or anything, but it is still AMA sanctioned. So it was kind of a little bit of a test to see what would happen. You know, nobody really knew.
What happened?
We didn't really know how to handle it, so there were no restrictions on it. So in hill climbing, we do 2 runs. Your best time out of those 2 runs from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill is what you take, and that's what you're ranked on. So the first run, I ended up running it at like, I think 60 horsepower or something like that. Just because that was kind of my best guess of like what would be useful. So when you start getting into like 80 horsepower, I mean, you're just blowing the rear tire off, you know? And I guess a whole nother topic on that is horsepower doesn't translate directly on electric. It's kind of a bad metric to use. Like when I was riding in Spain, I kept it at like 55 horsepower on the track. I tried going up a little bit, and I felt like I was going slower just because I was having to manage the throttle so much.
Was there more wheel spin?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So like a really tacky track or something, maybe you could go more. That track I couldn't. I tried going down, and it just felt slower. So that was kind of my like sweet spot. So I tried it at 60 for my first run. Felt like I could use a little bit more. Bumped it up to 70 on my second run, and that felt pretty good, honestly. That seemed about right for what I wanted.
And then how did you end up doing on the day?
I'm trying to remember. So we qualified for Verticross, which is a gate drop and 2 guys going at once. So I qualified. I think I qualified top 10, so I did okay.
Out of how many guys?
I think we had like 40 guys or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
It was a smaller turnout this year than we wanted, but I mean, it was still the 40 guys that we had were like pretty quality. You know, we had like a lot of like free ride guys crossing over. Obviously, Josh and Justin were there. So we had like a pretty stacked heat of people. When we actually got down to it and started racing Verticross, I made it to the third round, so basically like semifinals, and then I had to race Josh Hill, and I did get him on the whole shot a little bit. I got out of the gate a little bit better. I had him for like the first part of the hill, and then he just like outbraked me into a corner and just like left me. But that was a testament to his skill and my lack of skill, not necessarily the bike.
Going back to the Stark, I mean, it gives you a pretty good jump. I don't know if we'll blame that or blame you for your start quality. But no, I remember seeing a video of that, and you were hauling on that. You know, I think everybody was pretty stoked out there to see what it was going to do, and it seemed to go pretty well.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I was super happy with how it went, and yeah, and that the bike that I rode wasn't mine. Austin from Electro and Company, he has his bike, so he let me borrow it for that race, which was cool.
That's cool.
But yeah, it seemed like people were pretty happy about it. I mean, I don't know, it depends. Like, everyone's going to be happy about it to your face, and then they're going to like go off to the side and like talk crap.
I think no matter how you feel about it, we're all still curious. We're all fans of racing. You know what I mean? So if you're going to come over with this bike that maybe isn't my first choice, but there's a lot of hype around it, well, I'm going to pay attention. I want to see what's going to go down. You know, and I was like, well, is it better than, you know, like I'm going to be thinking all kinds of stuff as it rolls up to the line, but I want to see what happens. And so I'm excited for the bikes to make it stateside and start seeing them around more. Excited for you to get yours. Like I said, I'm a fan of performance, you know, and technology. And if we make something that's better or potentially better, I'm going to pay attention. That's just me speaking, but I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way, because that's why we make motorcycles go as fast as they go, you know, because you're trying to get the best performance out of them. So that's what I'm excited for. But then going into racing, how do you think to level the playing field? I mean, there's got to be, I don't know how to even get into that. You ran it in an open class, correct? More or less, kind of what it would be, or how did that translate?
I ran it in 450 class. Okay. So for hill climb, our classes are split up like 0cc to 450, and then 450 to 700 cc limit, and then 700 or 701 to open. So this is basically like the smaller class, and no extended swing arms in 450 class. Okay.
So, but then it's also in that discipline, the chassis is going to be a big variable too, with the swing arm and all that.
Totally. So this class, though, we used to run extensions on 450s. This is the first year. This was all through Moto Climb Super Series. And that's the first hill climb series that's not running extensions in the 450 class. But in that discipline, it's really about rider at that point. So, like, I'm actually a fan of not running the extensions now that we've done it for a year, because it makes you ride. You know, before, like, our hills on the West Coast are, like, pretty technical. They're not, like people picture hill climbing, they think usually like East Coast style hills where it's like almost a groomed like straight shot and there's like stair steps in the hill. That's not what we run on the West Coast. West Coast is like usually a lot steeper. We have turns. Sometimes we have some jumps in the hill. And Big Hill Jam's like a very unique hill where we have kind of a giant like step up immediately after the start, then like a little supercross section, sort of like a hip jump S-turn, and then the hill starts, and it's not like a super steep hill or anything, but there is a road gap in the middle of it. This year, nobody could jump it, but if you're rolling the road gap, you kind of have like a 10-foot cliff that you have to go up and then like get going again. So power in that class, like when you're not extended, is less of a variable. Like it matters, but it's not like it used to be when it was like an extended class where you could just like whip the throttle and go. Because now you're having to really modulate it because you don't want to loop backward, you know, and you have to actually like ride the bike. So having a power advantage in that class isn't the advantage that it used to be, basically.
And then obviously you're trying not to spin the whole time too.
Yes. Okay. That's like the whole key of hill climbing, is that balance between not spinning the tire and not looping backward. So your body position is like critical. Like if you watch like the top guys, like when they do a run, their body position, like forward and backward, is changing all the time. Like, or if they're on a good run, it shouldn't in theory change that much, but if the bike gets upset or they hit a bump or something, they're going to change that immediately and like be managing that traction and make sure you're forcing that back wheel into the ground.
Gotcha. What made you get into hill climbing, man? Like, I know you said you started with trail riding. Did you go trail ride, hill climb, moto, or how did that all come to be?
It honestly just kind of worked out. So like growing up, I didn't ride a whole lot. Like I was lucky enough to grow up to where we had like a little mini track in my uncle's yard in town. So I kind of just grew up riding that. Like I didn't ride competitively or anything for the most part. And then we went out, I think, to do like a pit bike race at one of the hill climbs or something out at Carnegie. So Carnegie SVRA is a state-run like riding area that's close to us, near like Tracy, California. And there's a guy, Skip, that used to run, his son George Horn. They used to put on events, 4 hill climb events a year, and we went out to one of them, and I was like, that was kind of cool. I want to try this. So I started, I think this was when I was on 85s even, did one on the 85, and then ended up getting a 125 and moving up to that class. And that was all just stock length. And we're talking starting on like the beginner of all beginner hills, you know, like I was terrible. But something about that, and like watching the pros, I was like, it looked achievable, you know, like I guess I looked at like Supercross, the top motocross guys, and I was like, there's no way, like I don't think I can do that. But I looked at kind of hill climbing, not to say like what we're doing in the pro classes like isn't amazing, but it looked more achievable to me, I guess, at that time. I was like, I want to do that. So I just slowly worked my way through the classes, 250 class, eventually moving up to the pro class with the extended swing arms and stuff, and kind of going from there.
Yeah, every time I see it, I just think you guys are nuts. Honestly, like I guess it looks kind of I've always thought it was like you're sending it. You're absolutely sending it. At least for me. Oh, that's my interpretation of it. So maybe I'm off the mark, but
it depends. So everyone's got a different riding style. So like growing up, like riding out at Carnegie a lot, like I said, doing trail riding and stuff, we would also hill climb a lot. So, and we're just talking our buddies' stock length bikes. Anybody that's ridden that area knows it's known for its hill climbs. So we'd go out there after it rained and find a hill that ideally no one could easily make it, you know, and we'd just hit that thing again and again and again until someone or all of us finally got up it. And it wasn't like we were consciously doing that as like training or anything, but that was fun. That's what we did, you know. And when you do that, you kind of learn like a balance between like sending it and also being in control, because eventually you get good enough where the hills you're climbing, if you're out of control and like you loop back, you could easily just cartwheel down the rest of it, you know. So there is kind of a technique to like it being in control, and like if you're not going to make it, stopping early enough, like getting your bike sideways on the hill, you know, not letting it fall like down and like low siding on the hill and things like that. So when we're racing, we're not so worried. Usually like we're making the hill for the most part. There's some races where like only a few guys are going to make the hill in like Montana or something. But for California races, like our hills, you're usually going to make it. So there's kind of a balance between like just straight sending it, but also making sure your run is smooth and consistent. So when you only have a 13-second run or something, if you get kicked and lose half a second, I mean, you could just have dropped 10 spots easily. It's because it can be that tight, you know. So you need to be making a run that's like in control, but also fast. And everyone kind of has a different approach. Like mine's, you're usually not going to see me do anything like spectacular on the hill. It's going to be a solid run. Like, I mean, I've won classes before. I don't win too much. I wish I did. But, I'm usually like pretty consistent, you know. Other guys are just straight checkers or wreckers. Like they're either going to win the class or podium, or they're crashing both runs spectacularly. Like there is no in between.
Who's that dude that when they first did Big Hill Jam that jumped that road gap? Or there was a couple. I'm trying to remember. I remember
that was probably Austin Tyler.
Yes, that guy. I remember that name. And that's when I think of hill climb. Like I think of guys like that.
Yeah,
like, that guy's full send.
That's just the different approach. Like nothing against Austin. Like he has the skill to back it up 100%. But like he and I have a completely different approach to racing. Like, he's going to be 100% checkers or wreckers, and it's going to be spectacular. Like, I don't care what you're doing. When he's taking his run, you watch.
Yeah.
You know, like, you don't know what's going to happen. Versus me, like, I'm a little more reserved. Like, I'm generally trying to keep my feet on the bike and stuff and, like, do a smooth run. And, like, sometimes it works for him, sometimes it doesn't. Like, he honestly, he beats me more times than I beat him, so I have no room to talk, you know. But it's my finishes are, like, maybe more consistent sometimes, but, like, he would win more often because he's going to send something that no one else is willing to, or take a chance that no one else is going to do, you know.
So you have a style like yours, and then a style like his, and then everything in between for the most part.
Totally.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. And then, so how long have you? So you've been doing that since little bikes, hill climbing.
Yeah, I've been doing. I think I've been in pro class, I think, for like 10 years now, because I moved up when I was like 18 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really rad.
That's wild now that I think about it.
It is. It's wild to hear that so you're 28?
Yeah.
I always, dude, your baby face, every time I walk in and I see you, I always think you're like 24.
That's what everyone says.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll take it. It's better than the alternative, right?
Yeah, seriously. Hey, appreciate it while you got it, dude. Because eventually, like, for me, fudge, like right around 30, and then people started calling me, like, especially at the pro races, some of the younger guys will be like, hey, oh, thank you, sir. And I'm like, what the hell? Oh. So then, Moto, was that just something kind of always on the side?
I didn't ride motocross tracks, like, consistently up until, I guess, probably till I moved to, like, pro class hill climbing, honestly. That was, once I started doing that, like, I realized I needed to ride more often. Like, I needed to be riding every week, you know, not just, like, once every couple weeks or whatever I was doing. And when I started riding track, like, I was pretty much a straight beginner. Like, just jumping all the jumps was, like, hard enough. You know, I was, like, scared of, like, doing the triples and stuff. And I've never been, like, a super serious motocross racer. Like, I'll maybe do a couple races a year and, like, do kind of the weird, like, one-off events. Like, I liked doing, like, Supercross Futures when they had that for, like, all the amateur classes. I had a ton of fun with those. I've done Mammoth before, like, kind of the bigger events like that. But for the most part, I've just kind of gotten, like, skill and speed from just doing practice days, like, on the weekends, and, like, trying to chase faster guys. And
You got a couple bears from Mammoth, don't you?
Just one.
Just one. That's pretty serious.
Yeah, that was like 250C class, like, years ago.
That's really serious then. Yeah, 250C, that's like the most lethal one. Just surviving to getting a bear on that one's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, that is true. Those guys are...
They're nuts.
Yeah, especially if you get a bad start like I did and you got to work your way through.
Dude, those are... Oh, man. I love Mammoth. Mammoth's probably my all-time favorite event. Just the vibe there is so much different. Then this year they had a mudder.
I saw that. I was glad I wasn't there.
Same. We ended up getting a little bit of downtime. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go over there. I saw Hills racing it. So I was like, man, I got to go hang out. And then I looked at the forecast. I was like, well, it's crappy here at home. And I looked over at the weather in Mammoth, and then just looked at social media, and you just see big old mudder. And I was talking to one of my buddies from Team Green. And he was just telling me that it was just like they had mud all the way up to the front of their where they were doing all the work, so they like had to pull the bikes back to provide the trackside services. Pretty bad.
I pay for all my parts, man. I don't need to be taking my bike out in those conditions. But I do want to get back to Mammoth because I want to go there with, like, an electric bike and just lay waste to everybody on the start, ideally. My skill gap's gonna, like, catch up with me once we get to the track, but not having, like, a power loss or anything, like, I think that would be pretty fun.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, if you have a two-stroke, you're going over to Mitch to make sure he jets it for you, and if you have a four-stroke, you're trying to get that map from Twisted. Just get a quick little flash and go out there from Jamie, you know. But yeah, electric, you're not going to lose hardly anything. Do you think... Is there conditions where the battery, if it gets too cold, it's not going to perform as well? Or if it gets too hot?
There could be. That would honestly depend on the spec sheet for, like, the individual cells. Mm-hmm. So, like, those 21700 cells, if I could speak, that I was talking about, depending on, like, what company they're made by and stuff, there's like an operating range and temperatures and like an efficiency level at those temperatures, they're pretty broad as far as I know. Like if you were in like sub-zero temperatures, you might have a problem, but like ordinary like use case that we would ride in, I can't imagine it's going to be like an appreciable difference.
Because I know my brushless motor, the ratcheting tool that we use at Dunlop, it's a brushless motor electric tool, and that when we go to Minnesota, those things are like dogs. Like you're almost better off. You either have to get it warmed up and use it a bunch, and it starts to work well, or even in Detroit, like when it's 20 degrees, it takes a lot more. So I didn't know if that's something that translates to the bigger batteries, or if it's something that's designed to be resilient.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure. It depends on what kind of battery is in that tool. I would think that like once it's warmed up, probably not a big deal. And there might even be software within the Stark to like kind of counteract that, like just run like a constant current or something to like heat the cells up. What might not be obvious to people that aren't like used to electric bikes is when we talk about the battery, we're not talking about like a battery. We're talking about a collection of like hundreds of small cells. So those 21700 cells, I don't know why that's so hard for me today, that I was talking about, those are small. Like we're talking like 70 centimeters long or something like that, and like 21 diameter or something. There's a convention for that. And it's basically they're all like stacked or ran in parallel in that shape. So you basically have like hundreds of those cells within that battery. It's not like one giant lead acid battery like your car battery or something.
Okay.
So that's something that people like get confused and isn't like obvious if you're not used to like that battery type.
What is it that gets hot when you're using an electric motor? Like what's the part on the bike that's going to get hot?
It depends what components you're using, but from what I've seen, the controller is usually like the weak link a lot of times. Not always, but that's, I feel like what I've seen for the most part is making sure that your controller can handle the current that's flowing through it, because that can get hot. Because the controller has like all of the current coming from the battery to the motor is passing through that controller. So like it's got a hard job, know.
And then that with the controller, is that where all the software is going to come into play, and how the power is managed is going to be by the controller?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So the Stark has, I'm sure everyone's seen, like it has a cell phone on the bar pad, and that connects, I think through Bluetooth to the controller, and you can basically adjust all of your maps. Like right now you can adjust like power and engine braking, and they're going to add some features, I'm sure, to that, like in later software updates and stuff. But obviously with every feature you add, there's a lot of like testing and like safety validation that has to go into that, because we don't want it doing anything weird.
That's what I was curious about. Like, if I was making that bike, I would want to be, or at least working with the software, I would think like traction control, or some sort of having the controller manage the wheel spin or percentage of wheel spin or the progression of wheel spin. Like, I think like that would be advantageous thing to work into those.
I would think, yeah. I don't know how much of that you can control through software. Some of it, I'm sure. I'm not privy to like what Stark's like future plan is with any of that. I can speak to like what Electro and Co does. They have a new True Moto line of controllers, and those kind of work similarly. Actually, they have their own separate phone app that you have like slider bars where you can control like power, engine braking. And I know we're looking to add features to that also. So there's a lot of things like there's so much you can do with that, and it's just a simple software update. That's kind of the cool thing. Like you can just airdrop a software update or just like update the app and you have new features, It's not like, it's like putting a new pipe on your bike, but it's just done through the air, It's kind of cool.
So then, like, you guys have experience with that through Electro and Co. with how you can constantly be developing something. Like once the hardware is out there, and then the software is in a form that's accessible, you could just be putting patches out or different, I guess, types of software, like making it accessible for people.
Yeah, so keep in mind that there's software and firmware. So firmware is like the code within the controller that's like always there.
Okay.
Whereas the software would be like what's on your phone and like what you're interfacing with as a human. But you can reflash firmware. I don't know. Again, this is outside my realm. I'm not a software engineer, but I would think it would be possible to like do a firmware update through the phone, like flash it from the phone to the controller if there was an update or something like that. But again, not something that I have like personal experience with or like being able to set up.
I'm excited to see what happens. I want to see him get into racing. Like I want to ride one. I want them to be here so I could go ride one and see what they feel like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, once I get mine, you're more than welcome to try it. Like, I'm going to be... Yeah, when I get that, dude, everyone's going to want to try it. Like, and I want people to try it. Like,
yeah.
I think that's the cool thing is, like, it's... Like, I'm so excited about it personally. Like, I want other people to try it. Like,
yeah,
I'm like, yeah, dude, like, go spin laps on my... Like, I'm probably just not going to give it to, like, some rando, but, like, anybody that I know even remotely, I'm like, yeah, dude, go spin a couple laps and, like, see what this is about, you know?
Yeah, because just hearing you talk about it, how quick it made you a believer into. I mean, obviously you're already into this stuff, and already a fan of it, or have a hand in that direction of where technology is going. But then to hear you come back, like when you found out, hey, we're going to go to Spain, and then you get back from Spain, you're dude, instantly faster on that thing. And I think that's something we didn't even get into is like, how do you feel and this is all hypothetical, how do you think you would ride or race in a 20-minute moto, just getting on Varg versus your whatever you're accustomed to, so your YZ250 or your 450, whatever you have, and you set your best lap on your comfortable bike, then you get a Varg, and then you have your suspension dialed in to within reason. How are you going to do?
Definitely better. Like I'll put it this way. If I had a race tomorrow and I took my delivery of my Varg this afternoon and I had the choice between racing the Varg or my 250, I'm taking the Varg. 100%, no doubt about it, not even a question. If we're talking like purely results, like, yeah, I'm taking the Varg. I'm going to be faster on it immediately.
Do you feel it's going to be the same way for everybody?
I would think so. I mean, even if you're coming off a 450, I feel like it might be a little different because I have some ride time on it, so it's not like a completely unknown entity to me. But I would think after a session or a day on this bike, you're going to be faster. I don't think we realize how much time and efficiency we actually waste on shifting and clutch. So, I mean, you think, like, picture a standard lap, right? How many times do you shift on a standard lap? For us, it's a little different because we're on 2 strokes, but even a 450, I mean, you're shifting at least, I would bet, 10 times a lap, somewhere around there maybe, just depending on what track you're riding. Every time you do that, I mean, you're having to either pull the clutch in or chop the throttle or something, or you're trying to, like, time it off of, like, acceleration or bumps or something, or do it in the air, but all of that is, like, thought and mental capacity and, like, time that you're putting into it. Not having to do any of that and just having, like, a linear pull from almost standstill all the way to, like, topped out gear, almost like a jet ski, right? And not having any kind of pause. I mean, you're saving... It's hard to quantify. Like, I'd have to, like, actually run lap times to see, but I mean, to me, intuitively, I feel like it's going to be seconds a lap for me.
That's crazy.
I mean, almost like picture like drag racing, right? Like, nowadays, like, you're going to think of like a Tesla versus just a regular, like, 5-speed or something. What's going to win? Tesla's going to win every day, every single time, because you're going to have to either just bang gears or, like, pop the clutch real quick, like, trying to shift on that 5-speed, right?
Well, then that's you even see that with gas-powered cars now. It's like they're all, I mean, gas-powered cars. Conventional cars, like even if it's the new Corvette or Ferrari, like everything if there's no standard cars, it's very rare that you get a manual transmission. And then what they have instead is the paddle shifting at the very least. But then even the setups with an automatic, it's more efficient than having somebody's interface to go and shift manually.
Totally. But that's the funny thing. So, like, me personally, I still like manual cars. Like,
yeah,
my like little commuter car and my truck and stuff are both stick shifts. Like,
yeah.
But because we're talking about two different things, right? Like when I'm racing or going to the track, like I want to go fast and I want peak performance.
Yeah.
When I'm driving on the road, like I'm just trying to have as much of a good time as I can just driving on a public road, you know? And for me, that's like shifting and that's gas, you know? Like I think people conflate, like they get a bad taste in their mouth with like electric cars or however people feel about like ESG movement and stuff like that. And they try to like extrapolate that into like electric dirt bikes. And I think that's a mistake because it's not, we're talking about two different worlds, you know? We're talking about like practicality versus just pure performance. When we're talking electric motorcycles, you're choosing this and you're riding it for pure performance. And that's not to say like I'm never going to get rid of my two-stroke. Like I still have tons of fun on it. Why would I get rid of it, you know? But if I'm racing and I want performance, the Varg and the electric bikes are going to be it.
Yeah, if money's on the line, you feel that the Varg's going to
totally
get you there.
Yep.
Man, I can't wait to see him. I'm excited about that. I don't know. I geek out whenever there's something new. It never really seemed like any of the electric companies before were able to really get their feet underneath them and go. You know what I mean? It was like the Alto was really cool, but it as quick as it was there, is pretty quick for it to be out. I think that just the anticipation of the Varg and the amount of publicity, maybe it's some of that social media nowadays, but also, I mean, I don't know anything about what were they involved in before those guys over there in Spain.
So Anton, the co-founder, there's another guy, I'm blanking on his name, that was also a co-founder, but he's the current CEO, and I believe he was either a founder or like very early in 24MX over in Europe, and basically helped build that from nothing into the giant conglomerate that it is today. So that's his background, and that's why, like, I have a lot of faith in him and what they're doing over there, because he's done something like this before. This isn't his first rodeo, you know. And meeting their whole team over there, like, they're really good people and they were enthusiastic about it. Like, you can't, it's hard to fake enthusiasm for an entire day, you know. Like when you're with guys for potentially hours on end, like it's hard to fake enthusiasm for that long. And with how hard those guys are working and how much they're building, like, if they weren't true kind of believers in what they were doing and like really excited about the product, they wouldn't be doing it. Like, even I think it was Ben. He's I can't remember his exact title. He's one of the higher ups there. And like when we first were in the conference room, like kind of doing a briefing on like what we're gonna see and this and that, he rode the bike through the office like pretty fast too. Like, and like just seeing him ride the bike through the office into the conference room and like the smile on his face, like you can't fake that, you know. Like, I know there's all these like crazy conspiracies about like the company and all these guys and Anton and stuff, but it's like those guys, from what I saw and like who I talked to and met, like this isn't some kind of facade or anything. Like, they're legitimately excited about it and like they believe in the product that they have.
Yeah, and then coming back to that line you said when they're like, no, we're trying to make the best bike. I mean, that's, if there's anybody doing it, that's the kind of the stance you would want them to have. Do you think it's going to change the sport completely, or do you think it's going to end up that direction, or how do you see it going?
Honestly, it could. It very well could. It has the potential to. It's all going to depend on how we handle it. If we handle regulations and stuff competently, and we are smart about like how we do class designations and how we set power limits and things like that, it could totally change the sport overnight. I'm excited because I think we're in a really cool space and opportunity as a sport where we could be the first sport that I'm aware of where we have gas and electric racing against each other. So when everyone's like, or a lot of people are saying, oh, we need like a separate class and this and that, and I get that concern because they're worried about what happened with four strokes, right? Like, the rules that were put in place made no sense. We ended up just killing two strokes off in pro racing, and that was a mistake. I think pretty much everyone agrees on that, and they don't want the same thing happening with electric. That's a valid concern. But I think if we do it smartly, I mean, how cool is that to be the only sport to have gas. I mean, you could potentially have 3 different power sources racing against each other. You could have 2-stroke, 4-stroke, and electric, all on one gate. Like, to me, that's cool. I mean, that just adds like a whole like third dimension to racing, you know?
Is there anything else that you would want to address to somebody that is listening that has any reservation about trying an electric bike, or maybe they oppose it and they don't want to see it in racing?
I think the big thing is you got to go in with an open mind. I've yet to have anyone try like one of our pit bikes or try an Alta, or anyone that rode the Stark, even if they were skeptical before, get off the bike and still not like it. Everyone that tries one in person is usually a huge fan of it. So, but that's different than pro racing, right? Like, people are kind of, they get stuck in their ways in a little bit, and I get the hesitancy there because they don't want everything going electric. Like, I understand the concern of like going to a Supercross and not hearing engines anymore. Like, that honestly would kind of suck, right? Like, the noise, and like, especially like when you're a national and like all the bikes are revved up on the gate and that gate drops and they all put the power down and you can like feel that through the ground, right? Like, that's cool. Like, we don't want to lose that. So if we can go about it smartly and make rules where all of them can actually compete, and it's not like every team is running electric or every team is running gas, and you kind of have like a healthy mix in there, I think it could be really cool. I mean, just, I don't think it has to be all or nothing. It is, I guess, what I'm getting at. Like, we don't need to like kill off 4 strokes or kill off 2 strokes and only be electric, and vice versa. We don't need to only have gas and no electric. We can all kind of coexist happily.
Yeah. I'd love to see that, man. I want to see how they do. You know, I think I've said that probably 5 times, and that's all I could think to say about it. They used to have the pit bike, I don't know what it was called. I don't know if it was Pit Bike World Championship or something like that, but it was in Vegas the same night as the Vegas finals. And I remember seeing, what was that? I showed you a video of it, a picture of those electric bikes that used to compete in it, but they would just mop the floor.
Oh yeah, those are like modified zeros or something, weren't
That's
they?
what it was. Yeah, it was a zero. But even then, you knew back then that there's something special with the electric stuff. And honestly, I know a lot of people are probably going to get pissed off hearing me say this, but I think I would assume that a lot of manufacturers are manufacturers that are, you know, whether it be a Honda or Yamaha or whoever, and we already see KTM doing it, but I would assume they're all working on electric bikes, you know, because we hear all this stuff with legislation of, oh, this is going to go electric, or you're going to have to do this or that, and they're getting rid of the green stickers in California and all that. That's got to be a technology that everybody's got up their sleeve, you know, that we may or may not know about. I mean, I don't know. At the bottom line with the racing side, I like seeing what's the fastest thing, you know, what performs the best. I don't want to see 4 strokes go away. I don't want to, or I not even that. I don't want to see combustion engines go away at all. But I'd like to see what it looks like when they all race each other. You know, how excited do you get watching Stank Dog go out on a 2-stroke?
Exactly.
You know, that was a big thing. Nothing by it. I mean, Stank Dog's a very good rider. If he went out there on a 4-stroke, just a 4-stroke, and that's what all of his results were just on a 4-stroke, he wouldn't have the same kind of following that he has. You would have to be there in person for him to stand out, and you know, and get to meet him and be like, oh, he's a pretty rad dude. You'd have to know that from being there in person, as opposed to him catching your eye in the broadcast or on TV because he's on a 2-stroke, or you look at the entry list and you're like, oh, this guy's on a 2-stroke. And we see that with everybody that's going, like Lesher. Lesher's another perfect example. The kid rides really well. I mean, all these pros, they ride well. You put him on a 2-stroke, you're paying attention. You know,
Totally.
I watch that guy ride every event he goes to. You know, and then on the other side, there's guys that are on factory teams that especially like the lights class, they're changing numbers every season. It's hard to kind of keep track. By the time I remember, okay, this guy's number such and such, they're already switching national numbers because they're going into the next season. But
oh yeah, it's a nightmare.
It's
I hate that rule.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with them, and so that's kind of what I'm looking at. Is like, I think when and if the electric bikes, if they start competing against combustion engines, I think they're going to stand out, and it's going to be something new and exciting to see. If all the bikes go electric down the line, and then there's one guy that's like, nah, I'm taking the old 450, and goes out there and competes. Again, it's going to be something that stands out. I hate to think of it, but also at the same time, I get excited thinking about it. It's a weird thing. I'm kind of conflicted on it, but at the same time, I'm curious. I want to see it. I want to know.
Yeah, but that's kind of the either or thing. And that's what I don't know that anyone wants, and that's what I don't want. Like I don't want it to go all electric. Like I want to have, and maybe we do go that way eventually, but I want to have kind of the trichotomy, the 2-stroke, the 4-stroke, and the electric. Like having all of one just isn't the same. Having all of them out there and like competing with each other, like that to me is going to be cool, because there's going to be areas where the electric bike's going to excel, and there's going to be areas where the gas bike's going to excel. Yeah. And I don't think that there's ways to reliably limit the power and be able to check that people aren't cheating by the AMA and not have it available to the teams. There are ways to do that. Like it's something we're working on, so I don't want to get into details, but there are ways to do it. And I think if we can come up with a robust system to do that, to where you can easily monitor if somebody's cheating, and people are going to have to kind of work together to come up with these regulations, though. Like it's probably asking a lot, but I think the AMA is going to have to get together with Stark and with some of the other manufacturers, and even some of the riders, like maybe not top riders, so they're contracted with a certain brand, but like get some of maybe like the satellite team riders or something that may not have like a direct like Yamaha or Honda contract or something. Have them ride a bunch of these bikes back to back and get a sense and say like, we feel like 55 horsepower on the electric bike is relatively equivalent to a 450 or something. I'm just throwing out numbers. Yeah. And maybe we need to adjust those rules as time goes on. But actually like really go through and do it right. Not do it off the cuff, or not just take a guesstimate. Like really go through and do it right and start now. Like if we wait any longer, I'm worried I don't want to see this technology get stifled just because we're not ready from a regulatory standpoint. Like that would be a huge failure in my eyes, to have Stark ready to go, ready to race, ready to fund a team, and not be able to because we don't have regulations ready. Like that would be really tragic, honestly.
Do you foresee like do you think a spec class would be pretty cool with, or not, I shouldn't say a spec class, but like a EMX class would be pretty cool to see in Supercross first? Or would you rather see them all in there together?
I want to see them in there together. Like you can run, because depending on like how you limit the power, you can run a Varg in 250 class. Like just say, okay, we're going to limit to however much horsepower we're going to allow you, and you can run higher in 450 class. Like that's the cool thing with electric, is your bike can be a 125 one moto and it can be a 450 the next, just with the slide of a bar on your phone,
That's
so
crazy.
The trick becomes, how do you reliably limit that, and how do you make sure no one's cheating, because you can in theory like lock him out of the app or something like that, but I think there's other mechanical ways we can do it.
That would be cool to see if that's something that you guys are able to get done. I'd be excited for that. We'll see soon. I mean, when you get your bike, shoot. hopefully you get it during my off season, so that way I'll be around for it. I don't want to be on the road. Like, shit, I can't wait to get home.
I know. Hopefully soon. I'm hoping it comes a little bit early. But we'll see. It'll be cool in Supercross though, because those bikes. We talked about like the jumping earlier, and kind of how it handles in that regard, and like the timing jumps to me is a lot simpler. So I could see it excelling in Supercross. Like maybe it's not a problem for like top pros, but for me on like a tighter, like a Supercross style setting, like being in the right gear and being in the meat of the power, especially on a 2-stroke, like that's hard, you know, like making sure you're in the right RPM range, like through a rhythm section or something. Electric, it doesn't matter. Like you're always in the right gear and you're always in the right RPM range, you know? So being able to like time jumps and do things like that, I think will be easier, but maybe there's other areas where they don't excel as much because they're going to be heavier. So they might lose a little bit in the corners, you know, like I think it'll create a cool dynamic for sure.
Could you imagine like a Tomac or a Barsha on an e-bike and how different that would sound? How much that would change racing in person? You know,
it would be wild. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Barsha on an e-bike, I think, would be like the most disappointing thing ever because you're never gonna you're gonna hear like a really loud whine all the time.
Yeah. That's about it. No, but hey, I mean, who knows? Like maybe you put a guy like that on it, and it's just like everything he was looking for.
Maybe so.
You know what I
mean,
mean?
I don't know. There's going to be, I think, a different riding style that comes out because, like, that style of like keep the throttle wide open and use the clutch as your throttle, that doesn't work, obviously. So you have to be like me as a rider. Like, I don't use the clutch a lot. Like, I modulate power with the throttle. I'm not someone that's just like hold the throttle wide open and clutch it. You know, that's
always
not me.
Blown my mind to watch guys do that. Like Eli's really good. He does that all the time. You know, and I just it's a totally different way of riding that I can't even fathom. And maybe I'm doing everything wrong. You know, that's why I'm not out there racing. But holy cow, I couldn't think to just modulate with the clutch. Like everywhere.
That's foreign to me. Like, I mean, because I could see like a guy like Eli might struggle because he's used to that, whereas a guy like Jet, that's not a whole lot of clutch and like a lot of good throttle control and just kind of like little blips of throttle to like hop through things.
Yeah,
he would probably transition to electric really easily.
Yeah,
would be my guess. I don't know.
That's interesting. See, the more we talk about it, I'm going to keep saying it. Everybody's sick of it. People are going to hate me, but I'm curious. I'm very curious. So we'll switch gears from that. How did you get into what got you into 3D printing?
So my first job out of college was actually at like a small medical device company. When I was there, we decided we were going to get a small 3D printer just to do like prototyping stuff. And that was really my first exposure to it. And I was like, I didn't really care that much at the time. I was like, yeah, it could be kind of cool, you know? But then as I was like using it more often and kind of seeing what you could do with it, and like the big thing was like making parts to like test fit. Like, let's say we wanted to design a bracket or something, and anytime, like if you're going to have a bracket CNC'd or something, you can't just do one. Like it's between the setup cost and like the programming costs and things like that. If you're subbing it out to a shop, is going to be crazy expensive. So a lot of times you'll nowadays 3D print it first, and you can check fitment, do those things. It's not going to be as strong, obviously, but like you can make sure, okay, all my holes line up, these bends are correct or whatever, like all these fillets work, things like that, and your geometry is correct. So I was using it for that, and I was like, this is kind of cool. Like, we might be able to do some motorcycle parts with this, because normally the barrier to entry on like plastic parts is mold cost. Like injection moldings, that's like your traditional method, I guess, of like forming plastic parts, where you would have a metal mold, usually tool steel, very hard to machine. That mold has to be machined. You inject really high temperature and high pressure liquid plastic into it. It cools, and now you have your part. That's how pretty much any plastic component on your dirt bike's made. Everything from your fender all the way down to like the rubber piece that goes over your clutch lever. All those plastic and rubber pieces are made that way. But with 3D printing, you don't have that upfront cost. So it doesn't make sense doing like high volume parts. Like if you're going to do 1,000 of them, you're not going to 3D print it. But if you need to make 10, it might make sense to do that. So I thought it would be kind of cool to start a business around that, because I can customize parts. I can put like your name and number into a part really easily, because it's just a one-off part. I'm not having to retool or remake a mold every time or anything like that. So I started out just doing simple like brake line guides, like front brake line guides, rear brake line guides. I would put people's like name and number and stuff on them and things like that, just for like a cool little like trinket and like customized thing on the bike. Like we all geek out over the factory bikes, like, oh, like Tomac has his name in the clutch cover, you know, like that's cool, I want that. And it's like, well, now you kind of can. Like, I'm not doing clutch covers, but like your brake line guide can have your name on it and things like that, and it's like custom tailored to you. So that's kind of how I got into it, where I was like, this presents an interesting opportunity to do unique stuff like that.
Nice. And then, so what's the little product run of stuff that you make? You got the brake line guides for front and rear. I've seen I don't know that you sell the stator covers, but I think I've seen you do a couple of those.
Yeah, I've done, just for people I know, I've done stator covers, just for like the YZ250s. They're hard to print. It's still, I have kinks I need to work out to be able to do it reliably enough to where I'm going to just like open it up to the public, Mm-hmm. But I try to focus on like the brake line guides, and then my other big product right now is the intake scoops for the Yamaha 4-strokes. So guys have probably seen the club team, they run like a carbon fiber intake scoop. And I was looking at those and a few other ones out there, and I was like, man, these things are crazy expensive. Like they look nice, not to take anything away from them, but a $300 scoop, I was like, that's kind of a lot. So I wanted to come up with like a little bit cheaper and potentially better way to do it, and also get some numbers behind it. And the cool thing with 3D printing the intake scoop is, like I said, being able to put the name and number in it, customize it to a customer. So now, like on my bike, I have a 3D printed intake scoop that has my name and number on it, and like, it's kind of cool. And I went through, I actually had my bike dynoed, I ran it with the stock cover, and then I put my cover with the intake scoop on there. I was able to get like a pretty sizable power gain. I ended up getting almost 1 peak horsepower, but the big thing was shifting the entire curve up. So like, everyone gets caught up in peak horsepower, and that's important, but the big thing is power under the curve, right? If we're looking at a horsepower curve, the area under that is power. That's what we want. If you can shift that whole curve up, that's huge, because now you have power across the entire range. And that's what we were getting with the scoop. So that's kind of the other big product. And I do a few other like knickknacks. Another one, like a kill switch cover. You might have seen like some of the factory guys run a cover on their kill switch so they don't accidentally hit it. You can still get to it if you need to kill the bike, but like if you case a jump and like your chest hits it or something, it's not going to kill your engine. I also make a pad to go under your transponder so it doesn't like rotate around your fork or like scratch anything, things like that. So it's just a small side company I do for fun, and just try to kind of bring little innovative products like that.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, I know the few times that I've seen you guys run the intake cover, or the custom one. I remember we put one on Don's bike, and he was just like, yep. He's like, man, this thing hauls, and I don't know if it's faster, if it just sounds faster, but I'll go faster because how good it sounds. But he was pretty stoked with it. So, and then what do you do for a 9 to 5?
9 to 5, I work for Motion Pro, the tool company. So I'm one of their product development engineers there. So I basically work on new tool designs. If we're going to do an update to an existing tool, I'll work on that, and kind of coordinate. I'll coordinate with our vendors, things like that. So like day to day, basically, like we'll come up with, or sometimes you bring back info from the races and say, hey, I talked to so-and-so and they thought this would be a good idea, or we can like modify this or whatever. I'll go in, make the CAD model, do the engineering work, usually do the prototyping. We have like a small CNC there. I'll go through, do the prototyping. We'll do the testing. You're usually involved in the testing process. If we like it, we'll bring it out into production. So that's kind of my 9 to 5.
Got a bunch of irons in the fire, man.
Way too many.
That's how it's got to be.
It's crazy. Yeah, you're all over the place.
Yeah, it's. I don't know any different way, man. It's not good for me to sit around. If I end up sitting around, I just mentally I just crumble. If I stay busy and try to get after it, then I'm feeling pretty good. Real good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, sir, I know you have a busy schedule. It took a bit of time to come by and educate us all on the Varg and kind of help us with the enthusiasm behind the electric bikes. And I think after this, for sure, I got a little bit more than I already had enthusiasm for those things. And one thing I was thinking about after one of the last podcasts that I had done was there's some people that are asking, I'd like for people to be able to listen to this stuff. Majority of people are going to already know about motorcycle racing, all that kind of stuff. I think those are the first people that are going to hear about it. But I've also had a lot of people that I know, whether it be neighbors or just different acquaintances that want to listen. And so I was thinking about, wow, if we broaden the audience a little bit to people that maybe aren't familiar about motorcycles, or maybe they're not familiar with racing, a simple thing that we can do to help the motorcycle industry as a whole. It's going to sound kind of cliche, but just go ride your motorcycle. That's the best thing you could do. You can do more. You could go to attend the races. You could do a bunch of different things. But if you buy a motorcycle and ride your motorcycle, that's going to help everybody. It helps the manufacturer. It helps the dealership. It helps the guys at the parts counter that are trying to make a living, providing a service. And then eventually your motorcycle is going to need a little bit of maintenance, so it helps that. It helps tool companies like Motion Pro to provide you the tools to do the maintenance. There's so many things that go into riding as a whole that if you like motorcycles, if you like motorcycle racing, going and riding is going to be the best way you could give back. And then also, the more people we have riding, the longer we get to keep our parks open to go and have a place to go ride, have tracks to go ride at, everything as a whole. It's that simple. So if everybody would just get out there and go ride your bikes, that helps everybody.
Totally. I mean, yeah, and I don't think people get worried. They think like electric's going to be the death of like the aftermarket industry and stuff, and I don't think that's true at all. I mean, you're going to have to tune the chassis, it's not going to do that on its own. You're going to have replacement parts in the motor still, not as often. There are going to be some things. In any company, like even you take like Pro Circuit or something, they're going to figure out a way, if they got to where they are, not by accident, or any of these main aftermarket companies, or even Motion Pro is a tool company. There's going to be some new tools that you need, and you're still going to need all of your chassis tools and things like that. So I don't see it as going to be like a negative on the industry at all, because I think it could bring more people in as well, because the barrier to entry is so much lower.
Yes, I agree with that. And I don't think it's a night and day change. If there is a significant change, I don't think it's going to be night and day. And if there is a significant change, I think it was inevitable. It was going to happen anyways. So it is what it is. Again, I'm excited, thankful for you to take the time to educate me a little bit more about it and educate our listeners. And we're going to wrap it up with that.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.